So, hi guys, Tim and Toby back in the episode 5, part 3, and this part we'll be looking at specifically the British 1st Airborne Division at Arnhem. So, last part we told you about the US Airborne Divisions, the 101st and 82nd, and talk about 30 Corps trundling down middle, basically connecting all the 5 bridges, you know. So whilst they were doing that, 30 Corps was basically getting very delayed, and so all the parachute drops have gone according to plan on time, especially British 1st Airborne Division at Arnhem. But the thing is, at Arnhem it was very heavily, I wouldn't say defended, it would be very heavily attacked by German tanks and infantry, because Arnhem was the main prize, and the last bridge to get the Germans, wanted everybody out there or everybody killed in the area. So when the airborne troops landed, members of the first British Airborne Division had to basically fight their way across to cross the bridge and into the main bit of Arnhem. Some airborne divisions had to go kind of to the nearest place they can find, and one of that nearest places was a place called Oosterbeek, which is actually a hotel, and partly cemetery as well, but mainly it's a hotel, Oosterbeek. And there's one very famous story, which I'd say very slightly famous, where a British airborne personnel was firing off his Bren gun, and just to say, the Germans were basically surrounding Oosterbeek. Loads of casualties, loads of prisoners of war as well, which loads of Germans had taken lots of prisoners of war. So this bloke who was basically got his Bren gun jammed had to try and unjam it, and the way that he stupidly tried to is smashing the butt on the ground to try and get it to unjam. And when it did unjam, it automatically went off, so he couldn't really control it, and it went basically leaning into his head, and a whole bullet went right up through his head. So that's quite stupid of the guy, but I mean, it's quite a bit interesting to say the least. Trying to unjam a weapon by smacking the butt on the ground. So that's quite an interesting story. Now the Germans, were basically all over Holland, because in May 1940 they had taken Holland and part of the Low Countries in France, which we'll talk about in another series after this one. But Toby, do you want to add anything?
Yes. So the operation over at Arnhem started when the British 2nd Tactical Air Force and the American 8th and 9th Air Forces targeted the known flak guns and German garrisons and barracks, across the Netherlands, and particularly the area in which they were fighting. So the British then landed in both hawser gliders and by parachute into the areas where they were due to form up. This is where the problem started, however, as the landings were somewhat disorganised, and also there were issues regarding communications to start with. I think the number 22 radio did not really have sufficient power to go through trees and buildings and stuff to reach 30 Corps, so that's when the real issues started. Then the landing grounds were actually away from the bridges, so they thought that the bridges would be too well defended just to land on, or land near anyway, so they landed away. This was a fatal mistake and probably the thing that killed the entire operation. So you have, in between there, this allowed the Germans a small window of time to get in several blocking lines, etc. So, famous ones, so we have the 16th SS Training Battalion, and their commander Sepp Kraft, and then Obersturmbannführer Ludwig Spindler, of the 9th SS Artillery Regiment, which became Camp Group Spindler, so they basically threw in Sturgs infantry. It was initially only 120 men, and because they then knew where the landings were, they started firing into the landing zones, which, you know, served to further disorganise them. So already, when the Allies advanced, they were already slightly behind time. This then got made even worse by the fact several of the prescribed routes to take to the bridge had actually already been blocked by Kampfgruppe Spindler, among others, and Luftwaffe training troops. So that's getting pretty bad. Sepp Kraft and others then absorbed even more troops from an SS Watch battalion. That was, I think it was possibly the second battalion of the SS Panzergrenadier Division. What's it called? The Dutch, Landsturm Nederland. So you had Dutch troops kind of fighting very desperately because they thought that was the right version of what they were fighting for. However, they weren't that effective. They were only really used to bullying prisoners because they had been guarding camps. And so, yes, they were fanatics, but they weren't sufficient fanatics to kind of hold the British back, and they were gradually pushed back. Eventually, the British managed to reach through a very precarious little route, the bridge, but then that, once they were there, got cut, or at least somewhat cut, by German artillery and troops and other stuff. So you ended up with the Germans stuck inside a perimeter, and another perimeter as well at Oosterbeek, very famous hotel there, the Hartenstein Hotel, where they had their headquarters, and also medic thing. I've actually heard a very funny story of, apparently they kept the German prisoners they'd taken in the tennis court. In the tennis court of the area, German prisoners were all there. And really interestingly, someone just, you know, one of the paratroopers said it's getting like Wimbledon here. They also had a very famous battle cry of "Whoa, Mohammed," which they'd picked up, some of them, while serving off in the Middle East. So it was, you know, the British fought like absolute lions there, but yeah, I'll pass back to Tim as we move into the mid and late stages of the battle.
Right, thanks Toby. Just to say that another bad really mess up for the British is the Germans had flooded basically half the field when the gliders came down. So when they came down, they couldn't really land properly because they just sank in the ground because it was so wet and marshy. Also, whilst the British Airborne troops were actually coming down, you know, this is the same with the American ones, they were getting fired at, so half the time they either landed, broke their legs, or if they landed incorrectly, or they're shot before they actually land. So the British, kind of halfway through Arnhem, the British 1st Airborne Division had to fight their own battle, or if they're not fighting, wait until 30 Corps reached them. Of course, by this time they had not even reached them. Radios couldn't get in contact with, you know, with 30 Corps or back to anybody because they had changed all the frequency on the radios, so the Germans wouldn't tap into their frequency. But that means 30 Corps couldn't tap into their frequency because they don't know the frequency. That's another mishap, which was quite annoying at the time. So a very famous guy called John Frost, who I believe, don't correct me, I believe he was a major when he dropped. He was one of the or Johnny Frost, as he was known to the men. He was kind of in command of the Airborne battalion who dropped at Arnhem. And this, if you're not part of a corps or a specific unit, regiment, you're part of this. This is the Airborne's own parachute regiment. This is the second issue of Cap Badge, about the time of 1944. That's that. Yeah, that's nice. And Quite an interesting story is when they're waiting for 30 Corps, the British Airborne Division, they actually heard a lot of trucks and tracks and trundling vehicles coming up their way, and so